Everything I ever knew about history prior to studying it as a high school and college student was from Forrest Gump. If you recall that film, if you've seen it before, you know that there are a lot of controversial times that he lived through. One of the times that sticks out in my mind is during the Civil Rights Movement and during the assassination of JFK in November of 1962. After his death, an unusual person comes to office, Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon Johnson carried the torch that JFK's presidency sort of set up in response to issues in the Civil Rights Movement and inequity in the United States. So today we're going to look at the Great Society, which was Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty and racial injustice. Essentially, it's a set of domestic programs that are proposed or enacted by the United States on the initiative of Lyndon B. Johnson. And two main goals of the societal reform were the elimination of poverty and racial injustice. The war on poverty is the most ambitious and controversial part of the Great Society. It's the initiative to essentially eradicate or end poverty in the United States. And the centerpiece of this war on poverty is the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. It sounds like a bunch of mumble jumble. What it is basically is an office that's created for economic opportunity for people to end inequality. And this office is created to oversee a variety of community-based anti-poverty programs, which we'll get into in a bit. Note the rapid downturn in poverty after Lyndon Johnson takes office. You see him standing there in a picture with JFK's widow, Jacqueline Kennedy, on the night of November 22nd, 1962. Note the rapid downturn, and it doesn't quite go back up again until the 1980s, and then finally in 2008, 2009, when we've just had a recession. So the Economic Opportunity Office spawns dozens of programs. Among them are the Job Corps. And the purpose of the Job Corps is to help disadvantaged youth develop marketable skills. We have organizations like the Neighborhood Youth Corps, which is established to give poor urban youths work experience and encourage them to stay in school. We have Volunteers in Service to America, which is like a domestic version of the Peace Corps. And that places concerned citizens within community-based agencies to work towards empowerment of the poor. So we see a lot of reliance on volunteers, just as we do today in some of these models. We have the Model City Program for Urban Redevelopment, which leads to developments like the Pruitt-Igoe building in St. Louis, which does not go well, and we can get into that a little bit later. We see organizations like Upward Bound, which assist poor high school students entering colleges, and provides legal services for the poor. Many of you may be familiar with the food stamps program. Here's Lyndon B. Johnson visiting some poor families in a rural area, where he really gets down and dirty with these families, and he decides to do something to help. And one of the ways that he does that is through assistance for food and household items. He wants to help the poor become self-sufficient, so he also develops a lot of community action agencies, and we see that through organizations like Head Start, if you're familiar with that preschool program, which offers preschool education for poor children. The most important educational component of the Great Society was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And that sort of ended this long-standing political taboo by providing real significant federal aid to public education. Initially, they allotted more than $1 billion to help schools purchase materials and start special education programs to schools with a high concentration of low-income children. The act established Head Start, which had originally been started by the Office of Economic Opportunity as an 8-week summer program, and then became a permanent program. We still have it around today, although it's debatable. Every year it seems like Sesame Street and Head Start almost get the axe in Congress. It created much beloved programs like Sesame Street and a Foundation for the Arts on PBS with the National Endowment for the Arts. So this is the reason we get to enjoy art and culture and theater, plays like The Crucible in our schools. Sing it with me, folks. Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Thank you, Lyndon Johnson. Okay, we also have a few health care programs that you might be familiar with that became norm. The Social Security Act of 1965 authorized Medicare and provided federal funding for the medical costs of older Americans. The legislation overcame sort of this bitter resistance, particularly from the American Medical Association, to the idea of publicly funded health care. What is publicly funded health care? Who wants that? We are in the middle of a government shutdown, or we are as of today. So people are still having problems with this, okay? So when you ask me why we need to study history, we've seen this before. The socialized medicine, making its benefits available to everyone over 65, regardless of need, and by linking payments to the existing private insurance system. So you get a lot of pushback from private insurance companies, from the medical community. How are we going to do this? But somehow it has worked. Medicare and Medicaid are still in existence today. Medicaid was a program developed in 1966 where welfare recipients of all ages received medical care through the Medicaid program. So Medicaid was created on July 30th, 1965. Each state administers its own Medicaid program. So the Federal Centers for Medicaid and Medicare monitor the state-run programs and sort of establish requirements for service delivery and quality. Okay. Carrying on in the tradition of John F. Kennedy Jr., his predecessor, Johnson launches the civil rights legislation just recently overturned, including the 1965 Voting Rights Act. This is a very, very controversial program, or controversial law that has recently been overturned by the Supreme Court. Originally, it was an act aimed at eliminating disenfranchisement for African American voters. And Johnson's view of desegregation included sending federal troops to protect young African Americans who saw resistance from their white counterparts in schoolhouses all over the South. The Voting Rights Act prevented drawing redistricting maps or making it more difficult for individuals to vote by requiring an ID in some places. We've recently seen that overturned with the suggestion that our country is no longer battling racism, so we don't need these laws. I would ask you to consider whether you agree with that or not, or if we still have problems that are just as important as they were in the heyday of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement. So be thinking about that. Is this an act that we should still have in place? Bottom line is, today we're very familiar with rhetoric criticizing the power of the federal government. The president has too much power, Congress has too much power, etc. Okay, the Great Society expanded the power of the federal government and added new roles and responsibilities for the federal government. So this is its legacy. The criticism is that the federal government went beyond its constitutional role and created a welfare state where individualism was replaced by federal paternalism. So the government is our daddy, right? And this kills drive, and it kills invention, and it kills initiative. Does that sound familiar? We hear a lot of this debate going on in Congress today. So the idea is that maybe we're still a 24-year-old kid living in our government parents' basement, and they're providing all of these services to us. A lot of Americans have a problem with that. They say it sort of kills the American spirit. But others would argue that these programs are needed to create more equity in society, okay? Some of these programs worked. Medicaid, Medicare, the National Endowment for the Arts, some of them didn't. But LBJ broke the mold in that he was a Texas good old boy, so he was kind of unconventional. He had a very commanding presence, and he was able to use a bit of charisma and intimidation to sway Congress to support these initiatives. This would be unheard of in Obama's administration today. Not all of these programs are effective, like public housing here in St. Louis. If we look at the Pruitt-Igoe building in North City, which was demolished within just a few years of its creation. So I want us to think about what are the pros and cons of the Great Society program, and do you disagree or agree that it is the responsibility of the federal government to provide for its citizens very basic needs like health care, medical care, education, and affordable housing? So it's up to you to decide. Your assignment today or tomorrow is to write an essay about the pros and cons of this program.